Hey, my name's Alex, and you're watching Big Al Books. Today I'm going to be talking about the books that I read this March. I made it through 11 books, which is a little more than usual for me, so I'm going to be splitting this wrap up into two parts. The first part is going to be about the novels I read by Canadian and First Nations authors, and the second part is going to be about everything else. So there's some nonfiction, there's some fantasy, and there's a new release. So if for some reason you're like, I hate Canada and I don't care, well then I'll see you in part two. But that would be a mistake because I think the Canadian books were the best books that I read this month, so I'm excited to start talking about them. So I had March break off this year and I wanted to do something productive with my time off, so I decided to get around to some books by First Nation authors that I've been meaning to check out for quite a while and just hadn't gotten around to yet. So the first one of these was Medicine Walk by Richard Wagamese, and I chose this book for a sad reason, and that's because the author passed away earlier this month, which I was very upset to hear about. Richard Wagamese was an incredibly talented Ojibwe author. He was from the Wabauseemoong First Nation in northwestern Ontario. The first book of his that I read was Indian Horse, which was a very powerful book that I stayed up until 4 a.m. in the morning to read in one sitting because I could not put it down. It's a book about a boy who gets sent to a residential school, which is, a horrifying experience, but at the same time he discovers hockey and he's really good at hockey. So it was a very fascinating look at this intersection between trauma and passion. And it was just a great book, so I had very high expectations when I was coming to Medicine Walk, and I'm happy to say that Richard Wagamese did not let me down at all. In fact, this book, you could argue, is just equally as powerful and emotional as Indian Horse. Medicine Walk is about a boy named Franklin Starlight who is raised on a ranch in British Columbia by an old man, and he doesn't know who his mother is. He does know his father, but his dad is an alcoholic screw-up who basically has only caused a series of disappointments for Franklin throughout his life. And one day, Franklin's dad, whose name is Eldon, calls him up and says, "You need to come visit me." So when he comes, his father's saying that he is sick. The years of alcoholism have basically killed him. He's going to die soon. And he wants to die in a traditional Ojibwe warrior way. So he wants to be taken out into the wilderness so that he can die on a cliff facing the west. So that's what this book is about. It is about this journey into the wilderness that this father and son take together, even though they have a very complicated relationship. Medicine Walk is powerful in a quiet and slow kind of way. If you're a person who needs a fast-paced plot, I can't see you enjoying this because pretty much nothing happens in this book. Rather, this will appeal to readers who look for in-depth character studies because that's where this book gets juicy. You really get to go in-depth into the lives of these two characters and how that affects their relationship, especially Eldon, the father. He starts telling his son some stories about his life that he's never told anyone. So you learn a lot about, one man's life, how what happens to you can change that, and how we're affected by the stories that we tell about ourselves. What I most enjoyed about this novel was how Richard Wagamese never tried to oversimplify anything or get too sentimental with his story. If this were a Hollywood movie, it would be a total mess. But Richard Wagamese is okay with leaving things complex and complicated and difficult to explain. So even though Eldon makes us feel more sympathetic towards him with his story, it still doesn't forgive him for his life of neglect and alcoholism and how he's treated his son. So Franklin still preserves a lot of those mixed feelings about his father, and often, a lot of the times, just doesn't know how he should be feeling. And as someone who's gone through a similar situation, I found that really relatable. I love the title of this book because I think that there is medicine in this story, and I think it's one of those books that you can read and it has the power to make you a better person. So I'm very glad that I read this book and very sorry that we lost Richard Wagamese because he is a phenomenal writer. Up next, I read Monkey Beach by Eden Robinson, and even though this book could get quite dark and serious at times, it just felt a lot more lighthearted and fun coming after Medicine Walk, and there's a lot of humor in this book that I really enjoyed. I also loved the setting. Eden Robinson is a member of the Haisla Nation, so it's set on the coast of British Columbia, which is like my favorite place in the world, so I just fell in love reading about what it would be like growing up there. Monkey Beach has two different narratives going on. The first one is set in the present, where Lisa Marie's brother Jimmy has gone missing, and she is traveling down the British Columbian coast in this small boat trying to find out what happened to him. The second narrative is about Lisa Marie's upbringing, so her childhood, and it's kind of this coming of age tale. Had a few kind of To Kill a Mockingbird vibes, mainly because Lisa Marie is also a sassy, spunky kid. I really enjoyed reading about her. I thought she was very funny. There's a scene where her uncle gets out of jail, and I think she's meeting him for the first time, and she just keeps kicking him, so that really won me over. Lisa Marie has these strange psychic abilities, so before anything bad happens to someone in her family, she is visited by this strange little leprechaun man, so there are some supernatural elements to this book. I also really enjoyed reading about her relationship with her grandmother, who's this tough as nails old lady that passes on a lot of traditional Haisla teachings, as well as just some good life lessons. Lisa Marie basically gets more and more troubled the older she gets. I found myself enjoying the childhood sections of this book more than like the teenage years, which is strange for me because I usually am not interested in people's childhoods all that much. But still, this was a really great book. I had a lot of fun reading it, and I need to get my hands on some more Eden Robinson. After that, I got around to Green Grass, Running Water by Thomas King. The only other book by him I've read before was The Inconvenient Indian, which if you are looking to learn more about relationships between settlers and indigenous people in North America, this is a really excellent starting place. It is a very funny book, but in the kind of sad as hell, I feel bad for laughing kind of way. But ever since I read this thing, I have been looking forward to trying Thomas King's fiction. I did enjoy reading Green Grass, Running Water, but not quite as much as I was expecting to. Easily the best thing about this book are the creation stories that are interwoven throughout the book. So it's separated into 4 parts, and each part is concerned with a telling of a different creation story. So they usually start off with Sky Woman falling onto Earth and what happens next. But these are very funny and irreverent takes on these myths. So there's a lot of pop culture and literature references in these stories, as well as the narrators are constantly bickering about how the story is supposed to be told. So I really enjoyed that element of the book. What didn't work so well for me in this novel were the characters. They came across as rather two-dimensional, and I felt myself rarely getting invested in their stories. That being said, I did enjoy Eli, whose story is the central conflict of the book, and he is living in a cabin that has belonged to his family for a very long time, and it's blocking the progress of this dam. So this company keeps trying to get him to leave his land so they can finish building their dam, and he won't do it. I also enjoyed the story of Letitia, who works at a restaurant called the Dead Dog Cafe, which is very popular with tourists, and it plays into their stereotypes of what they think First Nations people are like. So I really enjoyed like reading about these ignorant tourists who actually think that they are serving dead dogs at this restaurant. Unfortunately, I think there were just too many characters, and we didn't get to experience any of them in great depth. The novel is written in these short chapters where we're always jumping narrative perspectives, so it was kind of hard to get very invested in the story and care about what was happening. I may not have ended up enjoying this book as much as I expected to, but I'm still glad I read it. It was a fun, quick, easy read, and I have 2 more Thomas King books to go, so hopefully I will get on with them a little bit better. The other 3 Canadian books that I read this month all had to do with the Canada Reads shortlist, and the only book that I haven't talked about yet on my channel from that shortlist is Nostalgia by M.G. Vasanji, which was voted out on day 2 of Canada Reads this year. Out of all of the books on the shortlist, I thought Nostalgia had the most promising premise. It's a piece of speculative fiction set in a future where humans have figured out how to avoid death. That is, if you are privileged enough to be able to afford this procedure. And what they do is, in order for human life to continue, they have to wipe out your identity at a certain point and replace it with a new one that is entirely fictionalized. So you get this new personality and you have all these memories of a childhood that never happened, but it allows you to continue on living. So sometimes what happens is people get leaks from their former identity. They have memories of this former self that they don't remember. And our main character is a doctor whose job it is to patch up these leaks. And nostalgia starts taking off when this doctor gets a new patient whose memories are like really triggering for this doctor, and he just becomes obsessed with this patient, and the novel goes on from there. Bisanji explores a lot of issues that seem relevant to what's going on today. He explores resource consumption and depicts this world that is literally divided in two by haves and have-nots. There's actually like a border separating the two populations. He also thinks about what would happen to the economy if people were not dying off, and there's a very frustrated generation of young people who aren't able to find a place in the workplace because there's just people who aren't retiring now and just continuing to work. So I thought that one was especially relevant. Like, does that sound like anything that's happening today? This book explores identity and what makes us who we are. Like, is it your memories? Could you be transplanted with a new sense of self and still continue to be yourself? You know, can you override something like this self? So it got me thinking a lot, but unfortunately this book fell a bit flat for me because it did not live up to these exciting expectations set up by this premise. Unfortunately, the characters weren't very interesting and the plot just didn't have a lot of momentum, so this book had a lot of promise, but it didn't exactly live up to it for me. The other books that I read for Canada Reads were Company Town by Madeline Ashby, which is a sci-fi murder mystery set on an oil rig off the coast of Newfoundland, and it follows this badass bodyguard named Hua, who is hired to protect this rich boy who's getting death threats from the future, as well as she's trying to figure out why her friends are getting murdered. And I also reread 15 Dogs by Andre Alexis, which is a philosophical exploration of what might happen if dogs were granted human consciousness. So I have done reviews on both of these books, so if you're interested in hearing more, I will link those down below. These are the two books that made it to the final round of Canada Reads, and I actually was able to attend a live taping of that, so that was really cool. I knew by the final day that 15 Dogs was going to win, and I was quite happy about that. This was, for me, by far the strongest book on the short list, as well as Humble the Poet was an incredible defender. He was really respectful in a way that a lot of the other defenders weren't, and he just kept all 4 days bringing up new exciting points to talk about this book. So it definitely gave me more to think about this book, and I had a great time rereading it. It's pretty crazy that over half of what I read was Canadian this month, so go Canlit. Please let me know if you have any thoughts on any of these books or about Canada Reads this year. I'd love to chat. And thanks for watching, and hopefully see you in part 2.